With each president's arrival into the world, a unique snapshot of history emerges, revealing the curious intersections of leadership and legacy. From the cradle to the Oval Office, join us in uncovering the intriguing tapestry of presidential births and the fascinating figures who presided over their entry into this world. Get ready to witness history unfold in unexpected ways as we explore which presidents were in office during the birth of each commander-in-chief, adding a sprinkle of fun to the corridors of power. It wasn't until the 10th President John Tyler entered the scene that the presidential birth roller coaster kicked off. John Tyler bounced into the world on March 29, 1790, while George Washington, the father of the nation, was busy laying down the law and grappling with the birth pangs of a fledgling democracy. Talk about making an entrance. Surprisingly, the next president, James Polk, decided to join the party as well. He was born on November 2, 1795, still under the watchful eye of good old George. Now, here's where it gets truly amusing. The infamous Zachary Taylor, the next president in line, was born a whole 5 years before George Washington even ascended to the presidential throne. That's right, folks. Maybe baby Taylor was already eyeing his first presidential term from the comfort of his cradle while poor George was still donning his powdered wig. The delightful dance of presidential births continued, with George Washington's monumental era witnessing the arrival of not one but two future commanders-in-chief. Now close your eyes and imagine this. James Buchanan, the nation's 15th president, gracing the world stage in 1791, marking the final birth during Washington's legendary tenure. Quite the send-off, if you ask me. Enter John Adams, picking up where Washington left off. Amidst Adams's watch, only one presidential arrival made headlines. Millard Fillmore, the 13th president, made his grand debut into the world at the turn of the century in 1800. But hold on, because Thomas Jefferson's presidency was a veritable baby bonanza. Jefferson, the third president, presided over the birth of not one, not two, but three future presidents: Franklin Pierce in 1804, Andrew Johnson in 1808, and Abraham Lincoln in 1809. Now, that's what I call a presidential nursery. James Monroe stepped into the spotlight from 1817 to 1825, overseeing the birth of two future presidents: Ulysses S. Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes, both born in 1822. Talk about a double dose of presidential potential. And then there's Andrew Jackson, whose term from 1829 to 1837 saw a baby boom in presidential births. Chester A. Arthur made his grand entrance just 2 months after Jackson took oath in 1829, followed by James Garfield in 1831 and Benjamin Harrison 2 years later. And just when you thought the cradle was emptying out, Grover Cleveland rounds off the term with his arrival just towards the end of Jackson's lengthy reign in 1837. It was like a presidential birthing marathon. Then, the presidential birth saga took yet another captivating turn with the 10th president, John Tyler, setting off a domino effect that would span generations. President Tyler was at the helm of the nation when a neonate, William McKinley, made his debut in 1843. It was like the torch of presidential births being passed from one administration to the next. But then, alas, a presidential birth drought descended upon the land, lasting more than a decade and spanning the terms of almost 4 presidents. Who broke this long drought? It was Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, reigning from 1853 to 1857, who broke the dry spell by witnessing the birth of none other than Woodrow Wilson on December 28, 1856. And just a year later, as if to make up for lost time, the notorious William Taft made his entrance into the world, with James Buchanan holding the presidential reign. Fast forward to 1865, a year fraught with the aftermath of Lincoln's shocking assassination, and behold, the arrival of America's 29th president, Warren Harding, under the watchful eye of Andrew Johnson. It's like history playing out in real time, with presidential births punctuating the nation's narrative. And then, in a burst of presidential fertility, the births of Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover followed in 1872 and 1874, respectively, both emerging into the world during Ulysses S. Grant's 8-year reign. Chester A. Arthur's term from 1881 to 1885, while not as eventful as some other presidential tenures, did coincide with the births of two of the most iconic presidents in U.S. history, Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1882 and Harry Truman just 2 years later. Whether for better or for worse, these two individuals would go on to shape the course of American history, placing a significant weight on Chester's shoulders, in my opinion. The 19th century witnessed the birth of only one more U.S. president, Dwight Eisenhower, born in 1890 during Benjamin Harrison's presidency. Following this, the next 2 decades passed without the birth of any future U.S. president. As the 20th century dawned, Theodore Roosevelt assumed the mantle of the nation's 26th president. It was during his tenure that President Lyndon Johnson was born in 1908. Then, in 1911, the infamous Ronald Reagan made his entrance into the world, with William Taft occupying the presidential seat at the time. 1913 marked a flurry of presidential births. Firstly, during the tail end of Taft's presidency, Richard Nixon came into the world. I'm sure we're all familiar with him. Then, in the early months of Woodrow Wilson's term, Gerald Ford arrived on the scene. The fact that two of the most controversial U.S. presidents were born in the same year, and that the First World War broke out just a few months later, surely can't be mere coincidence, can it? Let's not forget another notable addition to the presidential birth roster during Woodrow Wilson's time. Enter perhaps the most famous U.S. president in history, known not only for his accomplishments, but also for the biggest and most controversial assassination in history. John F. Kennedy. Born 4 years into Wilson's term in 1917, Kennedy's arrival added yet another layer of significance to the political landscape of the time. President Chester wasn't the sole beneficiary of presidential birth luck. Calvin Coolidge's term also witnessed the arrival of some noteworthy figures in American history. It's almost as if Coolidge's very name foretold the significance of his era. After all, isn't cool practically synonymous with iconic? George H.W. Bush, born on June 12, 1924, and Jimmy Carter, born on October 1, 1924, were the last two presidents born before the onset of the Second World War. Little did they know, the world was about to make a dramatic turn for the worse, leaving them with quite the legacy to contend with. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president who holds the remarkable distinction of serving the country the longest, from 1933 to 1945, and being the only American president to have served more than 2 terms, oversaw the birth of just one future leader of the free world. I suppose being embroiled in war isn't exactly conducive to high birth rates. Shockingly enough, that person is none other than the current President of the United States. Yes, you heard that correctly. Joe Biden, currently aged 81 and holding the title of the oldest president in the nation's history, was born in 1942 during the Roosevelt administration. As if the White House didn't already have enough surprises up its sleeve. The post-war celebrations seemed to reach a fever pitch because just a year after the Second World War ended and Harry Truman took over from Roosevelt, 3 future presidents were born in the same year. Donald Trump, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton made their grand entrances into the world one by one in the memorable year of 1946. Some might say that we should have let the war go on a little longer if this is what victory brought us. And finally, wrapping up our presidential birth journey is none other than Barack Obama, born on August 4th, 1961. He holds the distinction of being the final president who was born during an ex-president's era, and that ex-president happens to be none other than John F. Kennedy. It's almost poetic how things come full circle on this one, isn't it? So, which presidential birth during another president's term surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.